Hi, actually with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the issue of the middle class. How do you bring it into being? How do you create it? What do you do, or what does any society do to construct an environment that can create a middle class? Can it ever be constructed? Should it always be organic? The organic bringing into being of a middle class in the West European nations, which was quite unique, really, around the world, particularly in the modern historical context, and particularly given what a large role the middle class played in wealth creation and so on in the West, that other nations and social groupings and racial groupings missed out on, in as much as they didn't create a middle class. So I want to talk generally about middle class. How does it come into being? Can you wave a magic wand? Can you push a button or flick a switch and suddenly the middle class appears? So let's have explore this. Now, I'm going to go back in time here. I think I was in the final year of high school, like at the very end of the final year, and there was a debate on in Sydney that was about apartheid in South Africa. Now, apartheid was getting a bad rap. It was, as soon as you mentioned apartheid, Hitler. It was sort of an association there that apartheid meant Nazi, meant Hitler, and it's this word association that the Marxist agitators quite successfully push around. Apartheid was nothing of the sort, by the way. So, did it separate white and black people? Well, yes, it did, but why does that mean it's Nazi? Anyway, and I'll come back to that in a minute. Now, the debate was two people debating the merits or lack of the apartheid system in South Africa, and if it went away, what would replace it? So I went along. Bear in mind, at the time, I'm quite left-leaning. I'm I don't know, 17, I suppose, and I'm quite left-leaning and quite sympathetic to the views. Now, I don't know much about the South African situation, so I'm going in to some extent with an open mind, but equally the media, particularly the leftist media that I probably listened to more than others, were again having this association that apartheid means Nazi. So anyway, so I go along to this, and I arrived. It had already started, and there were two speakers, one speaking for apartheid and one against. Now, the argument against apartheid was purely moral. It had no basis in any reality, and I'm thinking back to it. It was just, it's reprehensible, it's oppression, it's this. So there was an endless array of Marxist talking points. Really, that's why it was bad. But one thing that sort of came up was in the for apartheid, the guy was saying that apartheid over time would organically be dismantled. It wasn't there because anybody wanted it. It was quite expensive to keep in place. It was something that they kind of rather not have to do, but thought that they had to do it or needed to do it. And so the guy arguing for apartheid said, look, there are practical reasons. If we don't do this, then a lot of these black gangs and criminal gangs and hoodlum gangs will just come into the cities and they'll rob and they'll steal and pillage and rape. And so, that's no good. That'll upset commerce. It'll whole shopping areas will be devoid of people because they'll be too scared to go there, and people will be too scared to take their children to school and all this sort of stuff. So he was saying, well, that's part of it. And he said the criminality in the black townships is off the charts. So why would we want that criminality in the cities and the towns? A perfectly valid point. I mean, who could argue with that? That's denounced as, you're just being a racist. Well, no, it's being practical. So and as you look around Chicago and Baltimore in the US today, then how can you dispute such a position? The next thing was, though, and this is the bit about the middle class, the guy, and I can't remember the guy's name, but the guy talking said that the only way to dismantle apartheid was the organic, and I stress organic, creation of a black middle class. And if that's created, then organically and naturally, through its own momentum, apartheid would be dismantled because there would simply be no need for it. It would serve no purpose, practical or otherwise. So now this sort of, I remember it taking me a little bit by surprise. Not that I went in with, I suppose, preconceived notions, although my position would have been, given my leftist sort of schoolboy punk ass attitude, would have been sympathetic to the other side rather than to this guy talking for apartheid. But he said, look, what we have to do is we've got to pick the best and brightest and smartest black kids or black people, younger, and we've got to make sure they get a rigorous merit-based, I'm simplifying it here, a merit-based education, and that they win jobs and positions in, whether it be in government or in the private sector. They win by merit. And he said, if we can create an educated, merit-based black middle class, then they have direct skin in the game. He didn't use that term. That term came many years later, but they've got direct skin in the game in as much as they want to uphold a system that made them and was a vehicle for them to be successful in the society, not only socially, but also economically. And he said, but that's not easy because there are very few blacks that A, make the cut, or B, want to put the work in. And I found this personally, and not at the time I knew it. I thought he was being a little harsh, but that was again, I'm paraphrasing, that was the sort of thing but if we do create a middle class, now he suggested, this guy suggested that it could take, organically creating this black middle class. And he said, it's no good just having one or two. You've got to have like a decent number. Then, it could take like 50 to 80 years, which astonished me. When you're 17, 50 years, 80 years seems like an eternity. So I thought that was rather far-fetched. Now, today, I can look back on what he said and say, well, he was spot on. That this guy knew what he was talking about. Everything he said makes perfect sense. Now, again, the other side against apartheid, it was all moral posturing. Oh, it's evil. What is it? Has Hitler come back again? It's all that sort of stuff we see today that they throw around. Now, probably a few years later, I don't know, be more than that. Getting on for 5 years later, maybe something around there, I met a South African businessman, rich, well-connected, very cultured, very suave, exquisitely dressed and presented, all this. And I asked him, and I was interested, but I was curious, and then he was telling me about it and about how apartheid worked, why it was in place, what its purpose was. And he went into some detail pointing it out. And there was nothing malicious or racist at all in what he said. It was just a practical necessity. And he went over some of the same things that again, the criminal gangs and the black townships are just insane, off the charts. The criminality, the murders, the whatever. We don't want that in the cities. It's just not no good. And it's very hard to find enough black people that want to put in the hard work, whether it be studying and hitting the books at school and university, or want to put in the work. And he was saying that corruption and tribalism is just as natural to these people as night follows day. And he says to get them out of that attitude and mindset is very difficult, and it'll take a long time, but it can be done. It'll just take time in order to get that organic created. Now, this comes back to if you look at the Western world generally, the rich Western world that economically, industrially, and technologically pulled far ahead of the rest of the world. We see this organic creation of a middle class, and this is obviously central to why the West became rich and why it became again so technologically advanced. Now, an interesting thing about the cuts to the United States public service that are being made, Doge and all this USAID stuff and so on. There's quite a lot of people, if you look around for the vids, there's quite a lot of people saying, look, this money's not really wasted because we're creating black, trans, lesbian, middle-class people who are part of the society. Now, I'll come back and argue the merits of these claims, but the idea is that we're creating a middle class. All the affirmative action DEI jobs that go to black people in the government work and in NGOs and that sort of stuff. That's the United Nations. All these are middle class jobs, as in they pay middle class sort of pay, and these are middle class jobs. And therefore, we are creating a middle class of black people or lesbians or transgenders or, whatever. We're creating a middle class that hitherto didn't exist. And one of the big challenges has always been in the United States is creating a black middle class. It just hasn't really worked. And so this is how we're doing that. Can you actually create a middle class by flicking a switch or pushing a button, which is what they're trying to do? So if we just rando grab black people off the street and give them a job, diversity, affirmative action, race, gender quota job, and give them a nice pay, such as director of diversity at I don't know, big retail chain or something, paying $500,000 a year, that creates a middle class black. Well, no, it doesn't. She's still Shaniqua. She's just Shaniqua on $500,000 a year. She's done nothing to earn it. She's accomplished nothing, achieved nothing, produced nothing, created nothing, delivered nothing. She's just there as a bum on a seat, collecting a $500,000 salary while everyone pretends that we're creating a middle class. We're actually not. Again, these people have no skin in the game. They're as tribal. I mean, the first thing they do is employ all their relatives and boyfriends and girlfriends. I mean, look at Fani Willis in Georgia, for goodness sakes. These people can't not be tribal and can't not be corrupt. I mean, it just can't not be. And this was the point that the guy was making from South Africa, in the 1970s, for Christ's sakes. So this idea that because of the Doge cuts in the United States and because of the cutbacks in government employees, that if you look at the employees that don't do anything, that have nothing to do, they're just affirmative action shirt stuffers, that's all they are, that they will be the first to go. So if the criteria for cutting fat in the public service and government employment in the United States is people that don't do anything and haven't got anything to do and have no real job, then the argument that the leftists or some on the left are making is, well, if you're going to cut people who don't do anything and don't have any purpose for being there, then you're going to cut primarily minority and primarily black employment and primarily black female employment. So really, you all the advances we've made in creating a black middle class will now be lost. Is the argument that they're putting forward? I would argue it was Neville did create a black middle class. Again, it just gave LaShonda and Shaniqua a $500,000 a year job. That's all it did. And did Shaniqua have to bust her ass at high school or university? No, it was affirmative action throughout. So it's affirmative action right through high school, right through, she wouldn't have made it out of junior high school, Shaniqua. So they put her in senior high school, wave her through to that, then wave her through into university, wave her through into some sort of affirmative action PhD, and then install her into, director of diversity or director of culture or some bullshit in a multinational firm that's also on board with the globalist project and give her that job. But it doesn't create a middle class. I've met, when I'm traveling in the United States, I've met these Shaniquas, and you're not creating a middle class. You're just giving, a tribal, a feral tribal creature a $500,000 a year job, and the ability and capacity to act corruptly and tribally, which they do. It's like a magnet that it's got a gravitational pull with these people that they can't seem to escape from. There's some that do escape from, of course, but very, very small numbers. And this is it creating a middle class? No, I would argue that giving affirmative action diversity, equity, inclusion, race, gender quotas, gifting PhDs to Shanique was saying, and that doesn't produce or create a middle class. Could it potentially over centuries? I guess, but when you've got that much money around, then do you gradually acquire taste and the desire for the sort of the nice things in life, and then your children then acquire that sort of thing, and so they want to put the work in to get it. But certainly by my experience in hiring minorities, whether it be women or blacks, whatever, this idea of they all want the nice things. I want the waterfront mansion. I want the nice car. I want the nice clothes. I want the hot girlfriend or the hot boyfriend. I want all those things. But I don't want to have to work for them. I don't want to have to go without. I don't want to have to bust my ass and go through the uncertainty of I work hard, I try hard, I put everything into it, and maybe don't get everything that I want. Why do I want to have that risk? But that's how the middle class is created. Now, coming back to sort of the West, how did the West? It's a combination of things. How the West created a middle class. It's capitalism. It's the scientific. The scientific revolution, and even before that, it's competence, it's merit, it's capability, it's the rule of law, it's due legal process, it's private property protection. There's a whole combination of things that go into it. And other places, China's always had a potentially, particularly during the Confucian public service sort of stuff that was going on there. They always had the potential to really take off as a middle class, but invariably, private property, the government would cease to recognise private property, or cease to recognise inheritance, or it would. So a whole lot. So eventually, over time, it became that really your own family, other than your blood relatives, you simply couldn't trust anyone. Certainly not the government. And whereas the West, the government came to be a trusted partner, or until recently anyway, a trusted partner in creation of wealth, and of course things like protection of private property, courts of law, and the like. So many factors contributed, but those factors were uniquely found in Western societies, and therefore the middle class developed in Western societies. Now, what it did was people of capability could rise into positions of where they were, producing, creating, delivering, managing, business enterprise and invention and innovation. The steam engine didn't appear out of thin air, and neither did any of the other inventions that, the spinning jenny, and the list goes on. And this was all the creation of a middle class, that there were talented people, capable people who weren't the aristocrats, and you would describe them generically as, I suppose, working class, and they were able to, through their own capability, achieve some sort of prominence and wealth and status in society through that capability. So capability came to be recognised as a passport into a middle class. So you weren't a working class. You weren't born as an aristocrat, so therefore you were still in the middle. But they were able to create, the Western societies were able to create a big middle class, and uniquely so. No other societies were able to do this. So it's and that these societies are the richest societies. Now, coming back again to this idea, can you create a middle class outside of merit and capability? I would argue no, and yet this is exactly what the West is trying to do. The globalists, bringing brown and black people in from all over the world, and this sort of thing, minorities, and just gifting them what would hitherto be middle class jobs that would hitherto have been gained by white people on the basis of merit. So merit's been kicked out, and these jobs are just being gifted to people because that'll make them middle class. We'll just gift them something they haven't earned, and they'll somehow magically become middle class. No, you're just not giving it to someone who would have earned it on merit. And so it's been a complete and total failure. But the idea that if any sort of merit or any sort of productivity type measurement will invariably result in minorities being fired and or let go, then yes, I would argue, because those jobs overwhelmingly have been given not on merit, but on quotas, and not on the basis of any sort of capability or productive output. You've been with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for listening.